He knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he'll use the Eye of Ancestors, and then he'll melt your face. I've wanted to paint up the Leagues of Votann Grimnyr since I saw the model a few months ago. I had a few ideas. I wanted to go with a brown coat at first because that's how I'd painted my Hernkin Pioneers and they'd come out really well, but then I had an epiphany. Why didn't I just turn my colour scheme around? So instead of mainly white with red accents, do mainly red with white accents. Now that's all well and good, but as you know, he came out looking like Santa. I don't really like painting my models in a novelty fashion, but with this it really works within my army, so I'm keeping him. So let me show you how I did it. I realised that it would be really tricky to paint him after gluing him all together, so I left him off his base. So he's standing on his big tactical rock, probably the biggest tactical rock I've ever seen, and then there's a normal base with a rock and some mud on it. I wanted to paint this model from the bottom up because I wanted to get up under his robes before I stuck him onto his base. So I painted his tactical rock with Dawnstone, and I also painted the rock on his base the same colour. Any mud or gravel was painted with Wildwood, and then I applied Stirland mud to all the blank bits on the base. After all that was dry, I applied a wash of Nuln Oil across the whole thing, even the brown bits. When you're applying Stirland mud, make sure you apply it with a stabbing motion and an old brush, and just make sure that no bits clump up and there's not any flat bits that are just colour with no texture on them. After that it was time for a heavy dry brush of Dawnstone and then Administratum Grey. I also went to white on some of the very sharpest edges. Across all the brown areas I did a dry brush of Gorthor Brown and then Baneblade Brown. Let me know if you've started painting up your Leagues of Votann. I love these models and I love to see what everyone else does with them as well. If you want to, you can follow me on Instagram and I'll follow you right back because I just love seeing people's hobby work. Also, if you wouldn't mind chucking a like or subscribe my way, that would be great. After I'd finished the dry brushing, I put a little bit of super glue on and just applied a little tuft. I find a grass tuft always brings out a base really nicely. Next I painted his trousers with the best black, Black Legion. I was very careful not to catch anything else, although it'll be underneath the model and you can't really see them very well, but I was still careful. Next it was the brown bits, so there's a little bit on his cloak, there's a little bit between his legs, and there's a bit underneath. And I used Dragon Fang from Two Thin Coats for that. I think the alternative from Games Workshop would be Xandri Dust. I was very careful to apply it thinly and evenly across the cloak. If I'm being honest, I hate painting the insides of cloaks, because no matter how many coats I do, it never seems to be that smooth. So just do your best. After that is a really fun part, and that is all the trim. I say this is fun. It's fun at this part, but it's certainly not later on when you're trying to pick everything out in white. So relish this bit. Get some Basilicanum Grey contrast and just run it along all the trim. It seeps into all the gaps and it just looks great. I have to admit, at this point I was tempted to go with a white cloak and just the grey trim on it, but it didn't really fit in with my army. But maybe in the future I'll do this one. Contrast has a habit of when it dries, it leaves little gaps, so just go back and make sure that everything is covered. There is a lot of this trim, so it will take a while. For a bit of variety, in the final model I leave some of it grey, because I didn't want it to be white everywhere, because I thought that would be white overload. So I've left his little bib grey and also the face on the back of his cloak. Next we're on to the defining colour, and that is the red. I used Sanguine Scarlet from Two Thin Coats, but you could just as easily use Mephiston Red. It'll give you just as vibrant a colour. I carefully painted it across all the robes, just making sure I had a nice solid covering. This is kind of the focal point of the miniature, so you have to do this bit well. If you make any mistakes, go back and clean it up. Starting to take shape now, although he's still in the ugly phase. I suppose he'll never get out the ugly phase because he's ugly. I took a lot of time on this red, just trying to get it perfect and make sure that it didn't overlap anything else. To match my other models, I painted all the glyphs in with red as well. Belts and pouches were painted with Black Legion again, and if there's any metal bits like buckles, paint them Black Legion as well, because silver covers really well over black. It's quite difficult to get to bits under his left arm, so you might want to leave that off if you can, but I was excited to get this painted, so I put it all in one piece and went from there. I painted his gloves black as well, completely not taking my cues from any famous gift givers, and any other bits that are meant to be silver, like the top of his staff and the little head that comes over the back, painted that black. I painted the shaft of his staff Wildwood to give it a woody look. It's not like that in the box art, but I thought this would look really cool, and it does. Now buckle in for one of the most boring things you will ever do, and that is painting all the trim with white. You just have to be so careful here. You don't want to get any white in the gaps and cover up the Basilicanum Grey, because then it just looks really messy, so you just want to get it on the surface. Like I said earlier, there's a heck of a lot of trim, so you need to catch it all, you need to make sure it's pristine, you need to cover up your mistakes. It takes a long time, but the better you do here, the better your model will look. As you can see, I was very careful here, and even then I still made mistakes. I also blocked in any other bits that are meant to be white, like the big arch on his back. I got tired of painting runes at this point, so I dragged my brush across just to see how it would work, and it just picked out the text absolutely fine. So that's another method you could go for. I didn't really like doing that because it worried me every single time I used it, just in case I was going to mess up in between. But it didn't, so it's a very viable tactic. For the runic type design that I was leaving grey, I just used Dawnstone to strengthen it a bit, and that worked really nicely. Next up, I washed it all with Carroburg Crimson, so all the red was covered. I wasn't gentle with this stage, I just slapped it on. Any areas where the paint had pulled, I just touched them with my brush and it soaks the paint back up. Of course, try not to get the white, but you're guaranteed to touch it a little bit, so you need to go back with the white and touch that up. Like I said in my I'm Here video, white and red, not a great combo. You get any red in the white and that is showing up. I used Surcoat Silver for all the silver bits, although the Lead Belcher would do just as well. You might see me jumping back between base coating and washing, and that's because I'm trying to stay busy. I know I sound like Kenny Boucher here, but if I put a wash on and I'm waiting for that to dry, then I can go and do other things just to keep the momentum going and so I don't lose it. Because there is a possibility if I walk away from my desk to go and do something else, then I won't come back for hours and that's loads of painted time wasted. I was very careful to pick out all the belt buckles and details on his sword. You just have to be as careful as possible. Like I keep saying, the key to this is you need to tidy up your mistakes. If you make a mistake, don't just leave it. I wanted his beard to be a focal point as well because, I mean, the Grimnyr has a cool beard, it's got nothing to do with any other fictional characters. So I applied Apothecary White all over it. I also used Soulblight Grey to recess shade any other white bits. I layered Skeleton Legion from 2 thin coats onto his cloak. I kinda left a little bit of Dragon Fang in the folds, but not too much. I kinda decided at this point I was happy with a flat looking cloak, so I wasn't too bothered about creating too much depth there. Everyone would be looking at the red and at his beard and all that kind of stuff, so it wasn't too important to me. Next I mixed up Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red from 2 thin coats. The equivalent to Demon Red would be Evil Sun's Scarlet, so I mixed it about 50-50 for my first layer. And any bits that were facing upwards or edges or anything like that, I just hit them with that mix. I was very careful to leave the darker red in the recesses. Like I said, this is going to be the focal point, so we have to spend a bit more time on it. You can be quite subtle with this and just add more Demon Red every time you do a layer, and you can create a really deep, rich red. It's dead easy, it's maybe not how the pros would do it, but it works to get you a really nice looking model. I'm not about spending tens of hours on a model, I'm about getting them on the tabletop and looking pretty good. Getting you something you can be proud of. I mainly use the side of my brush for this highlighting stage. On the back of the cloak there's a lot of folds that you can catch just with the side of your brush. So don't do too big a highlight here, although it needs to be big enough so you can paint the next highlight inside it so that it looks like a gradient. So every subsequent layer I just added more Demon Red until I was using pure Demon Red, and I just used that for the very sharpest edges like his sleeves or the edges of his robes. There's also a really nice knee there to paint, so for the knee I just did circles and then a smaller circle and then a smaller circle and then a smaller circle, and it looks really smooth. Now this is something I hadn't tried before, and that was to add Dragon Fang, which would be like Xandri Dust, into my red mix, just to get a final highlight. I like how it looks. I wasn't sure about it at first, but I think it really adds something. I just highlighted every other highlight just a little bit smaller inside it. So that's the red done, and I'm actually really proud of it. I think it came out really nicely. I applied Reikland Flesh Shade to his face, and then I applied Nuln Oil to all the silver bits. Had a bit of a disaster here, a big drop of Nuln Oil fell onto the top of his hood, so I had to redo that whole bit. I didn't notice it until it was dry either, so it was just a disaster. His skin was just painted with Dwarven Flesh, Reikland Flesh Shade, and then an Elven Flesh highlight. I then added a little bit of ivory into Elven Flesh just to get a very fine highlight on all the skin. For his beard I highlighted every strand with White Star, although you could use White Scar, which is just about exactly the same thing. Next, while I had the white star out, I did edge highlights on as much trim as I could, and any other white bits on the model, like the back of his hands, or the big archy thing that I still don't know what to call. I tried highlighting the runes, but I decided in the end that my sanity was a lot more important. I thought giving him glowing eyes would be really cool, so I put a blob of ethermatic blue in each of the eye sockets, and that had the added bonus of not making me pick out eyes, so that was great. I layered up the cloak further with Skeleton Legion and then Vampire Fang. I just used thin paint every time and tried to do a smaller area each time. Like I say, this wasn't the focal point, I didn't spend a lot of time on this, but it doesn't look terrible. There's a wee funny power thing on his backpack and I just used ethermatic blue on that. I wasn't sure about this bit, I might go back and fix it later on, but for now it's functional and it works. I highlighted the gloves and all other black bits with Dawnstone and then Administratum Grey. I just tried to use the side of my brush to run it along the side of his fingers and across his knuckles. I also tried to pick out the belt at this point. It's a very small area to hit, so just take your time, be careful. I painted the handle of his sword Screamer pink because I realised I'd missed it. I do that with all my sword handles, and then gave it a wash of Nuln Oil and then a little highlight of Pink Horror. I'm sorry I didn't get footage of that, so you'll just have to imagine it. So that's it pretty much done. So just imagine all the cool gaming moments this will bring up when Santa kills Mephiston in the battlefield. It'll be awesome. It'll be something that you talk about with your friends for years to come. Thanks for watching, and if you want something else to watch, I'd recommend this one. Cheers.